Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, nobody makes New Haven tick more than the commenters in the New Haven Independent. Boy, they have a lot to say. They know a lot. They feel a lot. And believe it or not, they don't always agree. Well, there have been a lot of hot news stories these days. And we got two experts to help us run down the comments, one of whom has run down the hall for a second, but he'll be right back, so you'll see that empty chair fill in. We got Bob McCormack.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
Good. Great to see you, Bob. Bob's
Good to
a familiar
see you.
voice on New Haven radio going back to the 80s, right?
Yes, going back late 70s, actually.
Late 70s. So was that when you had your show with Anthony Duff and WYBC?
No, that was in the late 80s.
So what were you doing in the late 70s?
Late 70s, I first started at YBC. I was a newscaster.
Oh, yeah?
And then in 79, 80, a friend of mine had back surgery, and I ended up doing news at Woman Radio.
Woman Radio, is that 1220?
Yes, that was 1220, the last house on the right.
Uh-huh.
And I lasted about a couple of years. You know, it was only supposed to be a temporary job, but it ended up being a couple of years. And then it became PLR2.
Oh.
And then after that, I got a gig in 1983 as the news director of WNHC. When it was on College Street. It was on College. It was a R&B.
I remember Edie.
Edie Acabo was the station manager. James Jazzy Jordan was the program director. It had gone through some turmoil.
I remember.
Some bankruptcy. Martin Trigona actually owned the station.
And they had a lockout once with Michael Jefferson.
Yeah, that was just before that's when they were on Whaley Avenue.
I remember that.
And that was really the end of the station after that. And then now YBC owns it, and the students are on it.
And John Vleck is here. Hi, John. Great to see you. John Vleck is the retired assistant police chief in New Haven. He's also the resident criminal justice expert of WNHH Radio. So we're very happy to have John Vleck.
And a former New Haven assistant police chief.
Yeah, and he was also acting chief.
Oh, okay.
So he was in charge. All right.
A minute. Yeah.
All right. So we're going to read some comments from stories and then comment on those comments. And the first round of comments is going to be a civilian review. So New Haven now has passed an ordinance to have a stronger civilian review board. The mayor nominated a bunch of people. And as John and I kind of predicted, while everyone argued over what form it should take and everything, we thought it should have just been incorporated with subpoena power into the Board of Police Commissioners, but that issue's over now. People made their arguments why it need to be independent. The real concern, Mayor Tony Harper, was whether people would sign up and show up. And not that many people wanted to be on it. So when she came up with her final list, she didn't say yes to everybody, but a high percentage got on. People blasted two of the nominees because they came up to the board holders for hearing this week to have a committee says, do we want you or not? And two of the people they didn't want, who was a retired police officer, Bob Proto, and a journalist filmmaker named Steve Ham, who they felt was insufficiently leftist. They called him a centrist and said he didn't mention structural racism. And the basic argument was that all these other institutions are pro-cop. You need anti-cop people on this board. So let's read the comments and see where it goes. And we're going to be a little meta because John Vleck actually wrote one of the comments that I thought Bob or I could read. Right. And then we'll talk about it. John, you'll hear your words in somebody else's voice. So why don't you start, Bob, with telling us what Patricia Kane had to say?
Well, she wrote that the Board of Alders dragged its feet on setting up a CRB for years and then decided to set one up, almost as an experiment to be revisited in a year to see what, if any, changes might be needed. The lack of specific in who was eligible to serve made this controversy very predictable. From the start, I've supported having a retired police officer on the board because someone with working knowledge of police procedure is necessary to evaluate a given complaint. But is Proto the best retired officer for the CRB? It appears not. J. Rue Richardson is a gifted leader and a victim of racism that premeditates our culture. Permeates, That he survived the shooting is a miracle. Steve Ham is sincere in his desire to contribute. He's smart and, like a lot of white people, will learn the reality of life for people of color. The board was hasty in establishing the CRB without better criteria. The city of New Haven owes the residents of the city a public apology for the beat-down posse and all other forms of legally sanctioned brutality that have occurred to date. then maybe we will have a conversation about where to go next.
All right, John Vallecca, we're going to put on hold your views for a second, John. You have strong views on these. Why don't you read what Observer 1 wrote?
Observer 1, 9:40 a.m. A CRB that is populated solely with activist-approved residents will not be objective or fair. A CRB containing people of diverse backgrounds and open minds will render unbiased verdicts which would command respect from all parties. I do not see a CRB that fits this criteria being seated.
Posted by Alex. Here's what Alex wrote. Even if you don't agree with people against police brutality on everything, they clearly did their homework. Even if you don't agree that no cop should be on the board, the research they uncovered on retired officers' Protos connections to Billy White raises serious questions. The mayor put forth a diverse slate of people. Now it's up to the Board of Alders to set forth criteria, should there be any, about who should serve on the board. Bob, why don't you go to what Trustee wrote? Trustee is a current police officer.
He wrote, "Let the circus show continue. Jeru wants payback. I read a lot of excuses from him. It seems the police's fault for all his actions. I would ask Jeru, how should the officer you ran over in 2010 have attempted to de-escalate your foot from the gas pedal? NHPD officers are the lowest paid in the state and most likely have to put up with this crap. Joke."
5 exclamation points. John, what did J1 Carter have to write?
J1 Carter said, if this statement doesn't make sense to you, then it clearly proves your understanding of humanity is not the correct way of thinking. The CRB only exists because internal affairs, police officers in parentheses, police commissioners, actual police affiliates in parentheses, allowed too many events to take place that did not improve the trust between the police department and the community.
It can't be real, wrote. Sorry, folks. But anyone who thinks the CRB is their opportunity to get even with the cops should be kept as far away as possible. The CRB will be successful only if it has integrity. Period. Let's skip ahead to what John D. Vallecca wrote, but let's have Bob McCormick write what John wrote.
The CRB endeavor has become so anti-police that it will fail by default and fold inward upon itself. That's unfortunate because well-organized and objective CRB really could help restore faith in the police department. So Proto can't be objective because he's a cop, but Richardson can be because he's objective because he's a convicted felon. Makes sense, I guess. Can't find the eye roll emoji. Let's fast check Richardson, though, for a second. First, the BDP beatdown posse was not in effect in 1999. Sorry. That would have post Nick Pastor and under Mel Wearing. Further, I was there during the entire decade of the 1990s in the Hill, nonetheless, and I have never seen what was heralded as the BDP so that it lies. Second, the New Haven NEU was disbanded in 2008 until I reconstituted it in 2009. So if Richardson had drugs planted on him, it wasn't by New Haven NEU because there wasn't one. Get it? And 3 shots in the chest because he allegedly drove over an officer? I think Richardson was shot by the cop, as the cop was on the windshield of his car and Richardson was driving away. But this guy has the credibility and objectiveness to serve on the CRB. New Haven is officially upside down at this point.
All right, so we had a lot of comments here, and there are a lot of points to break down, and we're doing that on Dateline New Haven. We're commenting on comments posted the New Haven Independent to news stories in New Haven. We're doing the Bob McCormick, Radio News Pro, and John Vallecca, our criminal justice expert. So, John, before we get to your global point,
right,
which I have a feeling we're all going to agree on, I want to fact check you a little bit. J. Wu Richardson is someone who everyone applauded being on this board because he's someone who had case against the New Haven police, and he feels he was a victim of brutality of the New Haven police, and he has a criminal record. So they're saying he's someone who brings that perspective, but by the same token, they don't want a cop who they said ever did something wrong. So people feel that's a double standard. You're right, the beatdown posse was disbanded in 90. I think he's still saying he had individual experiences that he's falsely attributing to a unit that didn't exist, right or wrong.
Could be.
I was in court when, now there's no question Jay Wu committed criminal offenses. He went to jail. There's no question that he drove away from the cops and led them on a dangerous chase. I was in court for his case.
Right.
And there was a very pro-police cop testifying named Doug Harkins.
Yep.
And it was very difficult for him to answer the questions. but because he didn't want to be on that side and help Jay-Woo. But he said that it is true that his officer did something really dangerous. His officer was not being run over by Jay-Woo. Jay-Woo was driving away and put the cop's life in danger. But this cop actually was amped up. He caught up with Jay-Woo. He jumped on the car when it was stopped. He smashed the windshield and fired at Jay-Woo point blank, and a bullet went through his body. So even though that doesn't justify anything Jay-Woo did, I don't think you're completely accurately including what even a very pro-cop cop said on the stand was dangerous police reaction that was enough to have a judge, throw out the case.
This was the job. This was the only thing I was a little fuzzy. This was the job in the gas station on Whaley Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's where it ended.
Yeah. All right. So I'll stand by what I said. We were the detective division at that time. Doug could have his opinion and I can have mine. I'm not so sure the way it's portrayed.
Well, it's like Malik Jones. Malik Jones, when they had him boxed in on a dangerous chase against good practice, did they create the dangerous situation when the cop ran up to the car and he said, well, the car was rolling back at 5 miles an hour, so he's trying to run me over, so I had to jump up, smash the window, and fire point blank at a guy. Right. You know and I know that that's terrible police training. Terrible police practice doesn't justify putting cops' life in danger, doesn't justify committing crimes.
Jay will have stopped, regardless of this whole thing.
So could the other guy.
But listen, in the end, this is not an argument that I'm not going to have. Jay Wu could have stopped. There's a police officer in the front of your car. No matter how he got there,
I agree.
You stop.
I agree. But does that mean the police officer should jump on the car, break the window, and fire point blank?
Absolutely not. But he fired when the car was in motion.
See,
even
that's
Jay
very
Wu
unclear.
admitted that.
But it was rolling or something like half a mile an hour. It wasn't part of the chase.
Well, the car's moving. The cop is on. Put yourself in this position. You're driving the car. I get it. The cop is, did something very stupid to jump on your car, but it's a cop. He's on your windshield.
I'm not justifying anything Jay Wu did, but you and I have had this conversation where you've so much been on the other side, John. And police officers
I don't condone what the cop did.
He created a dangerous situation. He almost killed somebody.
I agree 150%.
And as a cop, he has special response. I'm not saying lynch the cop. I'm just saying that, let's be clear, there was also police misconduct that almost killed 100%. Somebody. 100%.
But poor tactics, poor training, not poor training, but poor implementation of that training. However, once the cop does something stupid, now you don't get the green light to do whatever you want. That's not how that works.
I agree, but that's the reason it was thrown out. But even if the car is rolling a little bit, it's like the Hampton shooting on New Hallville. They created, because the guy they were following did do something wrong, but they create. Okay, so anyway, the larger question was Civilian Review Board. So some of the commenters say the people on it, since we have a police commission that's pro-cop, since we have an internal affairs division, which I will argue, by the way, they've done a bad job, police officials, in holding cops to account for misconduct. But I actually have a lot of faith in internal affairs. I think they do a good job investigating. I've seen cases where it was top officials who then undid the good work. But people have a point saying we don't trust. The reason the CRB was created is people don't trust that it's a fair process with the police commission. So they want people who have lived the experience like Jay Wu, even if they've made mistakes, of what it's like to be on the other side of this. So the question is, should that be the whole commission, and therefore someone like Steve Hamm, who hasn't studied structural racism and is kind of a centrist who sees things from both sides, an ex-cop like Bobby Proto, who might be sympathetic to police, doesn't mean he can or can't be fair about that. Should they be on it? What did you think, Bob, when you were reading all this?
I think they should be. My opinion is of it, I think they can be fair about it. But my question is, who were they selected by?
So everyone who wanted to serve put their names into management teams or directly to the mayor. The mayor had someone vet the names and came up with the people. And it wasn't like picking, is it 12 or something, out of like 120. I think it was like a couple dozen. Some places they couldn't even get anyone to apply. And, Bobby Proto was a retired cop. He's involved in this community. He said, he didn't want to go in there to help cops. He wanted to do a sort of public service thing. Steve Hamm did a documentary on the police, and he said, I'm really interested in this. Now, the other people say you're not aware enough of what it's like to be a citizen who doesn't feel they're getting a fair shake from the police and isn't heard and hasn't lived the experience of being a black or brown person in New Haven who's scared for their life and has reason to be scared for their life and feel like they won't get a hearing from any other agency.
Right, sure, but you can't be an activist from the CRB, just the way you can't be an activist as a judge from the bench. It's got to be an objective endeavor.
Well, then can a cop do internal affairs?
To be honest with you, I would say I would try and alleviate that board of anybody who's got a tie on either way, whether it's activism or it's a police officer.
But wouldn't a fair-minded activist just like a fair-minded juror, and a fair-minded cop just like a fair-minded juror?
Well, I mean,
like I'll give you an example. I'm not going to
Sure,
name any names. There's one person in the department who's known for having a racial bias, according to cops of color. He's white.
Mm-hmm.
He's very pro-cop. He did one of the best internal affairs reports I ever saw. That whether or not they're right or wrong about the other thing, calling out a white cop for mistreating someone of color because of that animus, and not buying the excuse the person gave.
Right.
Whereas other people I've known have been on juries that gave such a break to police when they falsified evidence. I think you got to have faith that people can rise to the occasion and try to get all different kinds of backgrounds.
Yeah, but that goes to the argument of implicit bias. I think we all carry a degree of implicit bias one way or the other, and that kind of rears its head when it makes, and especially in important decisions. I'm not saying you can't be.
Well, I'm saying sometimes cops are the best cops of bad cops, and sometimes they make terrible excuses to cover up, and citizens are the same.
There's 3 types of civilian review boards you can have. You can have one that's a paid professional and investigators on there, You could have a second, which is what we have here, volunteer, and you could have a third, which is like an auditory. Some of you just audit the cases. The first, I think, is the best alternative. You have because you do need a degree of professional experience here and some objectivity. The second one, the volunteer one, put it this way: if you take the board, you're on the civilian review, and you're an activist, whatever the case may be, and you are doing okay, and I'll give you an example. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a review, and it's going to be suggested to the chief. Now, Tony Reyes is going to get this. He's a kid who, right now, he's a guy who's been in the bureau forever. He's been
not a kid, but yeah.
But he's done a lot. So if there isn't somebody on that board with standing to make an argument against his base of knowledge and say, no, you're wrong, you should look at this, he's going to say, I appreciate what you did, but I think I have a better perspective on what's right and wrong here. Now, here's a good example. Hypothetically, you give the Hamden shooting case to the civilian review board, you let them review that. Everybody will be, and you know it. What's the one thing they're going to say about one part? Guy didn't have his camera on. Can you believe this? This guy needs to be fired. He needs to never be a cop again. He's trying to get away. But if you have police experience, you know that if you're under fire and you're taking fire, the last thing I'm thinking about is getting out and holding the button.
But it was supposed to happen before. That.
Right, but so you don't do that. But before you know it, you haven't turned your camera on and you're in a shitstorm.
I think.
What do you tell everybody? Hey,
I think you and I agree that the issue is it's not the Hamden officer, it's the New Haven. I mean, it's the Hamden officer, not the Yale officer.
Sometimes, unless you've actually been in that position.
Well, that's why I guess the larger question, why I think was Mr. Bob said. So I think you have a good argument, John, that you don't want people with implicit bias from either side. So you don't want the anti-police activist or the cop.
Right.
I'm actually going to make the argument, maybe I'm wrong, that you actually want both of them because of their bias. I think that unless you've walked through Jay Woo's shoes and been shot at by a cop who did wrong, even while you did wrong, or there were other people up there who did nothing wrong. Iva Johnson just talked about how scared she was of her son. He was doing nothing and he got stopped and like you could die, right? There are parents who worried their kids are going to die because they're walking down the street with the cops and they have reason to believe it. Unless you've lived that and understand that, you can't bring, and we need that experience on there. And you also need, I think, unless you've been a cop and been shot at, unless you've made a mistake, like you're thinking 10 things at once, you need to put on your button, so maybe you need, the button on your body cam, so you need to be reminded of that, and perhaps even, go to retraining. Unless you've been a cop and walked in a cop's shoes. So I don't understand why people from all sides don't want all sides there.
Because you can do that through interview. Hypothetically, let's say I'm an attorney and
it's not the same thing in an interview. Like I'm a reporter and I try my best to understand people, but I'll never understand what it's like to be black and brown in the face of police unless I've lived it.
Right. That I completely agree with. And you can't, there's no way.
I'll never know what it's like to be a cop.
Understood. You can understand, you may not understand what it's like to be a cop, but you may understand why the body camera doesn't get engaged.
Intellectually I can understand, and I can listen and try.
You can report that back. So I would rather see an objective, paid, professional board. I think that's your best way. If you look at all of them, there's 18,000 municipal police agencies. There's only 150 civilian review boards.
Wow.
And 0 have been incorporated without some type of DOJ intervention suggesting
Department of Justice. So, Bob, I think what you're hearing in the comments and in the public is that, John's bringing up really good specific points and arguments.
I want to bring...
One of the commenters said that they think it's about credibility. There's a lack of public confidence. So the reason you need to do this separate from all the other arguments is you need some way where citizens feel they have an outside independent say.
I want to bring our listeners and viewers up to speed here about the Civilian Review Board. So how many people are on this Civilian Review Board?
They haven't named all the ones yet, so I think it's a dozen so far, and they're going to be more.
And they'll make recommendations on a police-involved shooting?
If there's a complaint, and IA hasn't found it, the officer guilty, but the community feels there's someone complaining feels it needs to be looked into, they'll look into it, they'll hold hearings, they will have subpoena power. They cannot mete out discipline. As John pointed out, they're just going to make a recommendation to the chief, so then you got to count that the chief does take action against cops who do wrong, which we don't always see in New Haven.
So they make recommendations.
Anywhere.
They make recommendations.
I've seen it at times in New Haven.
They make recommendations to the police chief and to the state's attorney's office?
No, not state's attorney.
Not just the police
criminals,
chief.
It's about,
So what about this shooting that happened on Argyle Street a couple of months ago? And it was an out-of-town cop.
That's a really good question. Would it be
and it was a Hampton
handed?
cop and a Yale cop. It was not a New Haven
I'm
cop.
guessing that would not come before this board because it's not a New Haven cop. Good point. And by the way, that report's out. In a week or two, we're going to have the decision about whether to prosecute.
Yeah, there's no way that would go behind. And if even if it made there, I mean, Hamden Police Unit would fight that tooth and nail. I mean, when you talk about being held accountable, I mean, there was an article in the Times not too long ago. I think it was in June where they said, it was 2,495 complaints against New York City police officers for deportment, and 0 were sustained. But the reality of that situation is what you have to understand is this. We don't have a ton of general orders that govern how I talk to you. It simply says, I must be courteous, and the thing there is, Paul, that over 90% of the complaints we get in internal affairs are about how you're treated roadside, the words that are used and how you're spoken to. So you may say, Valeka pulled me over and he was a complete jerk to me and he was condescending and he was rude and he was this and everything else. And you make your complaint. Now I get it and I investigate. And sure, Valeka was condescending and rude. However, there isn't a violation here.
But I'm thinking more like when someone gets shot. Right. Or like Eric Garner, the cop there got off. I mean, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
That is incredible.
Or New Haven, the people who, after general order, after state law, after training, continue to take cameras when people are trying to film them, and all the excuses are made from here until Sunday, including, you did wrong, but you could have lied about it.
And you're right. Those are the reasons why. That's why we're here, right? This is how we got.
And even if they're not always right, it's what people. So one of the things we heard in the comments was people feel that the public doesn't trust around this other layers, except from all the arguments John Valeka and Bob McCormick make about, what's the best way to do it and what's the best structure. Do you need it this way, subpoena power? Who has the authority? They're saying, bottom line, we want some group of citizens who gets to look at this. So I guess the question now is, what should that group of citizens look like?
Didn't J. Rue Richardson win some money from the city?
I don't think he won money. I could be wrong. I think he got that case thrown out when and he's continued to get arrested for some stuff. But again, so both sides kind of see it from one side. The people who are so mad at J. Wu say, should have cops in there, but not J. Wu because he got arrested. And then the other side says, well, Bob Proto was once a co-defendant because he was in the same room as Billy White when he did something wrong. Unless I'm missing something, I don't know that Proto did anything wrong. I could be wrong about that.
Bobby was, it's not news. Bobby was part of the unit. Bobby was part of Billy White's unit when he got arrested and during the 2 years of the investigation.
Was he ever
he was never
indicted,
he was never
or
indicted
accused of any
like
wrongdoing?
No, he was kind of like with Bobby, it's kind of a guilt by association thing.
Because that unit also did some good things.
Yeah,
there were good people on the unit. They got really good intelligence rather than using violence. There was a great story written by Hill resident on the comments section there to that story.
I saw it. Yeah, that was
where
good.
She talked about how she lives in the hills. She's an activist now. She's a prominent woman in New Haven. She's African American. She said, 40 years ago, I was selling drugs out of my home. I had a little kid there, and they broke down my door, and I didn't know who was coming in, so I had a gun pointed. And Billy White knew my name. And he called me by name, said, don't do that. You're really going to regret it. It's going to be okay. And then let her sit with her kid while someone came to get the kid.
Right.
And, people are complicated.
But I remember, Paul, seeing an interview on the local TV station, one of Billy White's crew, and he said they knew these kids would be back out on the street the next day once they arrested them.
Well, that's a different issue, but they were also stealing money. And there was a guy, Justin Kasperzak, who was also found guilty, who was like, they're stealing from people.
Like I said, but with Bobby was, he was, there are a lot of people that were with that unit who kind of caught a bad rap for no real good reason.
All right. But the good reason is that we're reviewing what the commenters wrote in the New Haven Independent. We're commenting on it here at WNHH FM's Dateline New Haven with the people who know a lot about New Haven, about the news. John Valecker, our criminal justice expert, and Bob McCormick, veteran radio newsman. I'd like to shift gears for a second, if that's okay. John, you dealt with this in the city when, just as you were leaving, there was a change in government where the Unite Here union, the Yale workers, were taking over the government by getting a majority of the Board of Alders and hanging tough as a block and getting policies to including a return to some community policing principles. Ward 8 is Worcester Square, and a new woman is running for Ward 8 Alder. Her name is Ellen Cupo, and her father is Aldo Cupo, who helped form Local 34 back in the day in the 80s. Second generation.
It was John Wilhelm back then.
Right. And
he was one of the ones who first organized.
And Cupo organized very closely with John Wilhelm, and now his daughter is a union activist, and she's running as a Unite Here affiliated Alder for Ward 8. Let's see what people had to say about it. Bob, what did Noteworthy write?
Joy, just what the city needs. Another union protagonist, because we can never have too much union control of democracy. Go political borough. You know Politburo. You know what drives affordability? Taxes. What do you say about taxes? Spending debt, pension obligations, crickets.
John, what does the average taxpayer say?
Says just what we need. Another voice from, assuming that Unite Here on the Board of Alders.
Paul Wessel said, delighted to see the next generation step up. Renews one hope. What does Teacher Gal say?
Good luck, Ellen. Ward 8 would be lucky to have you. You are surely a leader. And we were one as a child as well. Let me know if I can help in any way.
Okay, and KMO 8. What did KMO 8 say, John?
I am rooting for Ellen to win the Ward 8 seat. She's young, energetic, and passionate. As a Yale employee who was born and raised in New Haven, she has a special insight into the labor market and the needs of her community. I hope you go all the way, Ellen. I look forward for your thoughtful contributions, and God bless anyone who runs for Alder in this town. It is a thankless job filled by people ready to work 40 hours a week.
Okay, so you guys have two perspectives on this. Bob has worked a long time for Local 35 at Yale. That's the blue-collar union, and that's part of Unite Here. And some of the other Alders you know personally because you were in the union with them. And the union from Unite Here is now controlling the Board of Alders and really helping set the agenda for the city. Some people think that's great. Some people think that's not a good idea. John, you had to deal with Board of Alders very closely as a police chief. So what do you think about this question? You just heard two very different perspectives on this.
Well, this ward has really come a long way from the days of, I remember Michael Smart being Alder for quite a number of years. But the unions now are involved in politics in New Haven. And
how do you feel about that as a union member and a New Haven resident?
I think it's great. I think it's great. To some, it's kind of like monopolizing.
They're worried it's a
to
new
those
machine.
who have never worked in a union before.
And they critique is that they hold up stuff that's good for the city if it doesn't fit their agenda, pressuring Yale, and they're sneaky about it, and they don't have a broad enough, outlook on city issues. Don't really care about some of the other questions. It's all just about fighting Yale and using the Board of Alders to do that. That's the critique. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with the critique. That is the critique. John, what's your take on it?
Well, I've spent the majority of my career in the union, so I'm a pro-union person for sure. However, I do think that they are very well entrenched now in the Board of Alders, which has made them significantly stronger. And I'm okay with everything else they do, but when they start to delve into the police department and they start to flex their muscle in that regard, it makes things a lot harder, to secure funding and to set our agenda.
But aren't they supposed to do oversight, though? Aren't they were upset about overtime? Aren't they supposed to look at that?
Oversight is one thing, direction is another.
So what kind of delving would be inappropriate?
When you start to talk about policy and things like that, what should be done, sometimes you bring up, discipline in certain instance, that's what we have our police commission for. That should be an administrative. So the critique I've seen, I don't think they should be approving the police chief either. While we're talking about that, I don't think that that's their role.
Okay, I guess I was my critique that I've been a little more sympathetic to is that even though I agree with them, for instance, that anyone building hotels should have a union because we want good pay. They've done it in sneaky ways by trying to change the whole zoning code or make zoning decisions that they pretend are for other reasons that aren't, and then hold up projects that might be good for the city because of fights they have with people not admitting what it's for because it would be illegal to do what they're doing if they admitted it. However, I love their goals, and I think that it's good that they've cultivated so many good leaders like the Jeanette Morrisons, Delphine Clyburn, Taisha Walker. I mean, all these people. We have too few people involved in government.
And my buddy Brian Wingate.
Frank. So So
Frank
I think
Douglas.
unions, I agree with you guys that unions are a great way to develop homegrown leadership and leadership skills. And they have an agenda, but everyone has an agenda. The board of the Chamber of Commerce has an agenda. Yale has an agenda. Landlords have an agenda. And I think that people who complain about their influence should respond by also getting involved. Rather than tell people don't get involved, don't care about a set of issues, don't recruit your team and your leaders, don't do the hard work of taking over ward committees and getting out and asking people to vote for you and learning the rules. If you don't like it, the more the merrier. So you should join too, rather than try to stop someone else from being involved. That's my homily.
Agreed.
So the lady who ran, who took over for, was it Adam Greenberg? Was
Brenda Harris just did it temporarily. She was an elderly, a senior
so she
tenant
decided
leader.
not to run
Right, she was
again.
just a placeholder.
And Ms. Cupo here is running.
So I'm saying young person loves a certain vision of the city that's very positive. Welcome. And if somebody else thinks they have a different vision of how the city works, that's what democracy is. Clash of ideas. Have it out honestly and in the public. So I wish the union leadership weren't so secretive, because they claim they're for transparency and democracy, and they actually have shut down a lot of the public aspect of governing. People don't really know what they're up to or why. But separate from that, I think, thank you. I thank them for getting people involved who care about our city to be involved in government. I thank them for thinking about what they think would make New Haven better and trying to make it happen. And I thank any critics who then step up and try to challenge them.
Well, let's talk about alders in general.
Yeah.
They only get what, $2,000 a year.
Yeah, that's just a stipend.
They get like a stipend, right?
And they work long hours.
They work long hours. Their
And the phone
phones have
calls.
to be 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I mean, there's
it's a hard job. I wouldn't do it,
Mhm.
Bob. So I really commend them for doing it and to care about our city. And they got a rap for a lot of years. You just care about yourselves. You don't care about the city. Said, okay, we'll do an alliance with the community and try to hear each other's platform and try to work together.
I look as an alder, man or woman, you're a go-to person in that neighborhood.
You're the voice.
Yeah, you're the voice down there at City Hall, and you make some big decisions. And I'll tell you, the alder is it Sal DeCola in Morris Cove? He's going to have some issues down there with Tweed New Haven Airport.
Yeah, but he has no opposition this year. The Republican who's against the move to the west side. He's
And
running
aren't 4 Republican alders going to
3.
run this time? 3.
out of 30 seats and no one running for mayor.
Wow.
What do you think, John? Do we need Republicans?
No.
No, New Haven. I don't think New Haven will ever have a Republican mayor again.
But
Paul.
one day I'm hoping that in some form that he wins some race, and someday, I'm not saying this one or not because I'm neutral in races, I'm hoping that Josh Van Hosen wins office because he's this young Republican who has the best approach to politics. He has a different view. Yeah. He's smart. And he doesn't trash people. He's just trying to build support, and he's not a wacko like some of the Republicans. There's no offense.
Wasn't John Einhorn the last Republican alder?
He was. No. Carlene DePino.
Carlene DePino.
Okay, so Josh wrote in. Josh ran for alder on the west side. He ran on East Shore, and he gets a lot of respect from people whether or not they vote for him. He says unions can be a very important and powerful tool for workers, but we must be honest in the conversation and recognize they are a special interest group and must be balanced against the needs of the city as a whole. So that's John Van Hosen. He's running for alder in Ward 26. We wish him a great career in politics. And that comment is exactly why I feel that if you don't agree with how Unite Here is carrying out its power, that you need other people who don't agree to also run for office and make their case. So anyway, we're talking about that on Dateline New Haven. We're doing commenting on the commenters. We got the sharpest crew in the business, and that would be John Vallecca and Bob McCormick. Let's read what people had to say about how one says, I'm sorry. Or whether it's saying I'm sorry. Tony Harp is running for mayor. Oh, and John Van Hosen also. Oh, I didn't see Josh's earlier comment. Seems as if the structure of the Civilian Review Board was. Oh, now I lost it again. Was a bit rushed. If so much dissatisfaction and confusion surround it, I'm curious as a principal what project management techniques the BOE, the Board of Aldermen, applies to constructing legislation. Thank you for the comment. I think I would venture on a limb and just say none. I don't think they do any project management techniques, but anyway, we can leave that for what that is. Okay, so Mayor Tony Harp is running for mayor again. She's being challenged in the Democratic primary by Justin Ellicker. Her campaign made a wild accusation. They said, because there's an FBI subpoena of the Harp administration, and that makes her look bad. Mm-hmm. And even though it doesn't prove anything, they're not even formally charging her with any crimes, they're saying we're worried about how a lot of money was spent. It kind of dovetails with some stuff the Independent wrote about expenses that were charged, but there was no paperwork for okay. So the Harp administration said This is all trumped up by the Trump administration. And the reason is that Justin Eliker's wife is an assistant U.S. attorney. She works in that office. So she cooked that up, and then with the help of the Democratic town chair, had everyone find out about it in a campaign, and they're all working together to just get me out of office. Now, there's a big uproar about that because that's quite an accusation. First of all, it would mean that Justin Eliker's wife broke the law. She was appointed under President Obama, has zero, like a lot of career prosecutors, has zero political connection to the Trump administration. Yeah. She handles like civil forfeitures, none of these kind of cases, and there was no evidence for this. So the mayor took a hit from it, but she went on WNPR and said, I'm going to tell you what she said, okay? She was asked about it. She said, well, in retrospect, it was ill-advised, probably. In the future, we will not attack any family members. And she talked about how she'd been attacked in the past for her husband by other people. But she was asked if she still believes the accusation is accurate. And here's what she said. I don't really know. It's something that at the time he brought up. I don't think it can be proven. Certainly, I can't say it's baseless either. I can't say there's a basis for it either. So in her view, I talked to her later. She was very upset that we wrote about this. She said, well, I was putting it to bed. But everybody who heard that said, you continue to say it might be true. Like, remember when Donald Trump said Obama was born in Kenya? And then he said, well, I'll have to produce now my birth certificate. He said, well, I can't prove you were born in Kenya, but I can't prove you weren't. So I'm doing a service by throwing it out there. Or if I said, John, you went out and you just robbed some banks. I have no evidence, but I can say, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's untrue. I just can't prove it. So let's see what people thought about that. So what did Alex write about it? It was the one that has little type at the top.
The mayor gets attacked for what her dead husband may or may not have done all the time. Now she needs to be asked about and attacked about one dumb press release from her 23-year-old campaign manager that she already disavowed. Meanwhile, a very real issue. Someone in a candidate's family working for Trump's DOJ is ignored. Eliker's initial statement says he and his wife are very careful for her to recuse from issues that affect New Haven. How does that work exactly? Conspiracy? No, that was a dumb allegation, but I don't agree that Eliker and Trump DOJ connection should be completely off limits.
John, what did Thomas Alfred Payne write? That's not his real name.
I read it. It's like I could have actually written it the way he's. But many people believe that Mayor Harp has frequently taken bad advice from some of her confidants. Some people, even supporters and those who work with her, have questioned her judgment on numerous issues. When the outrageous Donald Trump FBI DTC Eliker conspiracy to derail the Harp campaign with a federal investigation first surfaced, it sent shockwaves of incredulity.
Incredulity.
Yeah, that's one of those words where I just can't pronounce. Throughout the Democratic Party leadership and the community. It appeared to be a Trumpian move of campaign desperation to slander Justin Eliker. Many blame Jason Bartlett and her campaign manager, Ed Corey, for this kind of gutter politics. The Democratic Party leadership was outraged because it was implicated in the conspiracy. Some felt Corey should have been fired immediately. Harp said she did not.
Harp should have. She did not.
Harp should have. She did not. I agree. To her personal and political discredit, Corey still works. Now we read that Harp said the conspiracy charge was ill-advised but may be true. This is political doublespeak. If true, it cannot be ill-advised. If a lie, the mayor looks like Donald Trump. So what is it? Mayor, there is no basis for this lie. You can and should say that, or your reputation and your integrity are at great risk. Excuse me. Personal political attacks are reprehensible. Attacks against family members are worse. But the promotion of lies and fantasy that the President of the United States had a personal vendetta against Harp because she boycotted a White House visit and lending to that story's credence as a possibility is intolerable. It is an insult to our collective intelligence. In the 2013 campaign, Harp was a victim of bitter attacks on her late husband, her son. The family was accused of being tax cheats and slumlords. Harp was even accused of living in Bethany and being out of touch with the black community. All of those ugly charges were made by one single candidate, and it was not Justin Eliker. Those who have been victims of mudslinging should never repeat the same.
Worcester Square wrote, this looks really desperate on the part of Harp. I'd love to see what her campaign's internal polls are saying. What did Cunningham say, Bobby? You don't need to read the underlined parts.
What exactly is the issue with Natalie Eliker's career? According to her LinkedIn, she defends the U.S. government in tort and similar legal cases. And according to these DOJ news briefs, She's active in informing veterans and service members about their rights and protections under the law.
It hardly seems.
It hardly seems like she trumps lackey.
All right, so let's break down a couple pieces here. Now, some people, I saw a black-white divide in town because some people say it's not ridiculous to think Donald Trump would go after Tony Hart because he boycotted an event. Because it's true, Donald Trump will do vendettas if you're on the radar. And other people point out. I talk to African American people who are smarter than I am, have lived through more, very more reasonable people than I am. They say we believe this could be true because of the history of conspiracies against black people in America. J. Edgar Hoover, COINTELPRO wrote a whole book about it. It was true. They did horrible conspiracies. Tuskegee, President Wilson, the Black Codes. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the Home Ownership Loan Corporation. There's been conspiracy against conspiracy. On the other side, there's that danger of when you say, I can't prove this, but I'm going to make it up and feed into this legitimate well of believability in the black community, and people feel that might be very divisive, and that's really important that you be unequivocal when you say, I'm not going to make up things against people. So how does it stand for you? And also, I'm also concerned about, during the era of Trump, there's always concern that we no longer trust the judiciary. When Trump goes after judges because they're Mexican, American, born in this country, and saying they can't be fair. When he went after the FBI and says it's not legitimate. When he loses a court case, he, like a baby, doesn't say I lost because of merits. He says, therefore, they're illegitimate, and I'm just going to ignore the law. What is this like that when you're kind of having people trust the Department of Justice less by casting aspersions on U.S. attorneys? Or is it fair game, as Alex says, if you're going to stay on as one of thousands of prosecutors in career service, if there's a new president in the U.S. attorney, then you're fair game for attack? Thoughts?
Fair, Bob.
I really don't have any thoughts. I just had a thought about years ago when Ben DeLito's office was bricked and there was a cross burning in front of Hank Parker's when they ran for office. So to me, this is kind of
there's
like
a history of racist violence, right? That happened.
Yeah, back then when they ran for mayor. But this attack here, I think it should be ignored. And let's move on to the real issues in this campaign here.
All right. What do you think, John? Are you concerned as someone who worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office that these attacks by the mayor on a U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney, and at the whole office? So first of all, some people said, is this smart? You're being investigated by the federal government, and you attack the federal government when they're investigating you and saying that they...
It's the most, and to my personal opinion from... what I know of the mayor is I think she's too intelligent for this. I think she should have distanced herself from this immediately.
And she thought she was distancing herself with this comment that I read.
I mean, sometimes
was she distancing it by saying I can't tell if it's true or it's not true?
Absolutely not. Distancing herself in a very hard, very definitive fashion. We don't think that it was an ill-advised. It was it was sent out without my knowledge, whatever the case may be, and put it to bed. It was completely opposite of what you want to do. Then you got the rest of her staff, and Bartlett is on Facebook and everything else saying that this is baseless, this is a witch hunt. And I can tell you from experience, they don't go on witch hunts.
So they said subpoena is like a freedom of information request. Doesn't mean they think anything. They're just doing a search for information. Is there more to it?
Of course, there's more to it.
Do they think before they do a subpoena? Do they have some basis for asking? Doesn't mean you're guilty, by the way. That's important.
The New Haven Independent has got some pretty damaging emails. And if the New Haven Independent has got those emails, you could imagine what the FBI has. The FBI does not.
Well, it started when we did in a freedom of information request and found out all the stuff they paid for without saying how they spent the money.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a very important topic.
That's the stuff they asked for.
All right. It's something they always, when I was there, we were always looked upon. We were always audited, especially coming after the corruption scandal.
So your bottom line is you feel this was not putting it to bed by saying we don't know if it's true or not.
No, she should have. I don't believe that there's anything to it, to be quite honest with you. The historical racism, I get that. I agree 100%. You can't deny fact.
Does that make it more dangerous to make unsubstantiated allegations as they play into legitimate concerns?
Of course. I think
so.
It does.
Bob, but you think move on.
Yes, let's move on.
So you think the mayor said enough?
There's real issues here in New Haven.
And what about people who say the FBI investigation is a real issue?
It is a real issue. It definitely is a real issue.
And if Harry Giroux were here, he'd want to be talking about, because I see what he's writing, about how this is like the Mueller report in his view.
But did Justin Ellicker's wife have something to do with that? I think that's ridiculous.
But you're saying the mayor said enough, move on.
Yes.
And John, you're saying the mayor should say not only was it ill-advised, I have no reason to believe it, and it's not true. And I'm not. It was wrong to suggest
Best
it was
thing
true.
you can do if you're under FBI investigation like that, and you're the head of anything, she's happened to be the head of city, but if you're head of the police department, say nothing. You're cooperating, fully, and that's it. Leave it at that.
And I know the people, the U.S. Attorney's Office, were quite upset because they feel like their
Of course.
credibility gets
You would be,
damaged.
right,
Of
I would
course.
be too. I would be too.
Well, and I know as a reporter, we always get blamed for being the bearer of bad news too.
Right, but it's a little bit different because this is the DOJ. They're not used to, and don't forget, somebody launches that kind of an allegation. Now they have to look in that. Now Mrs. Elliker she may be internally being looked at for this because it was brought up, and they have to do that by protocol. That's unfair to put somebody through the stress of that kind of thing without having any kind of foundation to do that. That's not right.
All right. And Harry Joe says, we know that the FBI doesn't go on witch hunts, right? LOL. That was the
Who's
FBI.
that, Harry?
Yeah, that was the FBI whose emails were showing that most of them wanted Trump elected. And they did it first time in their entire history, made a statement against someone they weren't prosecuting, Hillary Clinton, weeks before the election. So they helped ensure she didn't get elected. But Harry didn't show up, so Harry doesn't get the last word. All Harry is doing.
Lofting bombs from outside.
Harry Joe is the station manager. He's too busy running the controls and doing the magic that lets our program be heard and become part of the morning for people on all different social media platforms. Thank you, Harry Droz. We might disagree about some of this stuff, but you are the best station manager in the universe. And
by the end of the day, there'll probably be somebody heading the DOJ because they listen to our show, Paul.
That's right. And Bob McCormick and John Vallecca. It's always great to have in the studio. Thanks for coming in regularly and today helping us comment on the commenters.
I like it.
Run down the news. I really enjoy that. And thank you for the great comments you guys put in the Independent. You keep us busy, and it's good busy. Thanks for joining us today in Dateline New Haven. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.